Yo, what's good, E7 fam? Pat here with another video. They just dropped the balance adjustment survey review over on Stowe, and I thought it would be fun to give my 2 cents. And when we go through the data, I give you my answers for this balance adjustment survey, and we kind of compare them to the ones of the actual player base. I just thought it would be something fun. So as always, this is one of those long form videos where you can just sit back, relax, and listen to the sound of my voice as I scroll through the notes and we just talk about it. Enjoy. So the first thing I wanted to talk about here is this little statement right here. A total of 21,819 players participated in this survey, and it was available to all Epic 7 players for 7 days. So, Epic 7, through a quick Google search, we can determine, is a game with over 5 million downloads on the App Store and the Google Play Store. So, if we treated those each as individual users, unique users, then we would arrive at 0.4% of the player base actually took this survey. Now, you and I know that's probably not the case. There are things like bots, there are things like re-rollers, there are things like account sellers, there are people who quit the game. So, let's say only 10% of those is actually real. We'll say 500,000 active players is what we actually have for a player base in Epic 7, right? That would give us 4.3% of the player base actually took the survey, which means 95.7% of players most likely didn't take this survey, which raises a couple of questions. One, do players not really care about balance, or at least in this case, PvP balance? Two, and this is a cynical take, the players who responded, did they have some kind of agenda? Like, the only people who really responded are the people that wanted to push for specific things to be better than they actually are, even if those things are already good. And three, what was the visibility of this thing? Did people actually see it? Because the only way I knew about it was somebody in my Discord actually informed me about it. I did not actually see this survey come from an official channel. So let me know down in the comments below how you guys found out about this survey, or if you didn't find out about the survey, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, let me know as well. Because I'm curious to see how many people actually saw this, because that is a really small number for this survey compared to what the, supposed total player base or player count is for this actual game. So I'd be very, very surprised to hear from you all on this matter. So now let's look at the player rank of surveyees. 6.2% were from rank 51 to 69, and unsurprisingly, the lion's share of responses came from people at rank 70 at 93%. That means that most people responding to this are intermediate to late game players. They are invested players, which makes me wonder, why not grab, because it says up here, it was available to all Epic 7 players for 7 days. Why not show me the data for the rank 50 or less? Or was there no one that was from rank 1 to 50 that actually responded to this? I think that it could only be a good thing to collect data from low-level players. As somebody who has done consulting work for trading card games in the past, one thing I always try to push for is the casual or new player experience. If your new players or your casual players can't easily get into your game, they cannot easily enjoy your game, and they cannot easily progress to feel like they can make it towards that competitive level or to achieve their goals, then they will leave your game. It is very important to actually get data from those people, because that is the young blood, the lifeblood of your game that will keep your game pumping. If no new players are coming into the game, then it becomes very stagnant and you see the same names all the time, and then, the game's not growing. And if the game's not growing, then people will start to leave in droves, in which case then, your whales will leave, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how the game dies. If it doesn't it's like an ecosystem. If you don't have new people coming in, then the game will just eventually die. So let's move on now to the ML 5 stars. I will show you my top 3 picks, which 3 I thought should have gotten a balance adjustment. My number 1 was Silverblade Araminta, my number 2 was Desert Jewel Basar, and my number 3 was Dark Corvus. The number 1 pick for most players was Silverblade Araminta at 16.9%, and it's pretty easy to see why. This character was incredibly dominant when she first came out. got nerf hammered pretty hard, wasn't nearly as good. Immunity set came out, more players adopted immunity set, better cleansers came out. So this character's role as it exists right now, Silverblade Araminta as a character, has absolutely terrible game feel. You can't really play her in PvE, and in PvP, her gameplay pattern is I stun lock you, I win, that's awesome. I didn't stun lock you, I lose, this character is awful. Now, if you look at the opponent's side, right, they play against Silverblade Araminta. I got stun locked. I didn't even get to play the game. I died. This character is OP. Or, man, that character literally did absolutely nothing. So, why would you want Silverblade Araminta in the current state that she's in? Because she's either the worst character in the game or completely oppressive if she's actually allowed to do what she does. So, I think that this character definitely needs a rework. DJ Basar is a common theme that we're going to talk about in this video. DJ Basar is a cleanser. Why would you ever play an effect resistance based cleanser when Hand Guy and Designer Lilibet exist? Cleansers in general are just absolutely terrible in the current state of the game because the best cleansers are the ones that don't need the stat that cleansers need. They just exist. They are tankier than the cleansers that we have, and they deal better damage, and they provide more buffs or more utility to your team overall. So why play DJ Basar? I did a whole write-up, like this character just needs a complete rework. They need to look at all of the cleansers in the game because they basically made a massive mess up with Mediator Quirk. And since they're not willing to nerf characters right now, they have to, again, seriously reevaluate every cleanser in the entire game. Faithless Lidica is an opener in a metagame where she's in a 114 speed bracket and everyone else is way faster than that. So she will never do anything. Again, same gameplay feel as Silverblade, right? It's literally, I do a thing or I do nothing. Specimen says, I can understand, has been reworked, is only good in teams with characters like Silverblade Araminta. So he either pops off and feels like the best character ever, or he does nothing. ML Ken and Judge Kisei are characters that were buffed / reworked, and people hate their reworks, so I can understand why that's here. Dark Corvus is my third pick. He's been non-existent in RTA since they made the effectiveness change or effect resistance changes for the most part. I should say it is actually the effectiveness. I had it right the first time. So he's not even a factor there. In Arena, teams are too fast or too oppressive for him to really punch through at higher rating. So his only use now is in Guild Wars and only against a very small subset of compositions. He used to be great versus like every Guild War defense. That's not the case anymore. So Dark Corvus really needs a lot of love. That's why I chose him. Top model Lulika has been completely eclipsed by Milim. There's no reason to play TML when you could just play Milim. And then Remnant Violet and Last Rider Crow. These are puzzling to me because these characters were heavily played in Emperor and Legend last season and are absolutely fine. I think the people who voted for these are just people with an agenda. All right, ML 4 stars. I chose Guider Aether, Wanderer Silk, and Great Chief Kawana as my three that I felt needed buffs the most. The number one response was Guider Aether at 17.7%, and it makes a lot of sense. So aside from selling this character for silver transmit stones, where do you actually use this character? When do you actually use them? Nowhere, right? That's pretty much the response. The character is not played anywhere in any form of PvE or PvP, and Wanderer Silk, who was the number 2 response at 9.1%, is pretty much the exact same thing. You only use her for the Little Queen Charlotte Abyss stage. You don't really use her anywhere else. There's pretty much no reason to play her. Celestial Mercedes is third at 8.1%, which is interesting because this character is incredibly good in not only Wyvern 13 one-shots, but also Golem one-shots and also Azumanic 13 one-shots. But at the end of the day, it still kind of sort of makes sense because there are comparable options that you could be playing that require less investment. Celestial Mercedes needs to be plus 10. That's a lot of Malagoras. She needs pretty good gear for the most part. You could use somebody like Bloodblade Karin or even like, I want to say like Charles in some of these situations. You can obviously, for Hunt, use Clarissa. So it makes a lot of sense. And because there are, again, comparable replacements. And then also, not everyone one-shots. A very small subset of the population one-shots their Hunts. Even a lot of popular streamers don't run a one-shot composition for most of the Hunts. So again, it's a very, very small subset. Great Chief Kawana was here at 4th. That was my third pick. This character is designed only to do Katie's hunt runs and is not even in the top 10 Katie's characters. That is pretty much a symbol or a sign that you should rework the character. The character is not good enough at doing the one thing it's designed to do. And no matter what you do, it probably isn't going to be the case. So you're better off just reworking her. Interestingly, fifth place here was None at 6.3%. You hate to see it. Then you have Shadow Rose here at 5.3%. Makes a lot of sense. Used to be a very heavily played character in the first year of Epic 7. People really wanted this character. Then she kind of fell off hard once we got I-90 gear, and she just fell by the wayside. So yeah, I guess the people who invested in her really want to bring her back to form, because right now she's only good for Banshee 13. Roaming Warrior Leo makes sense. Had a lot of buffs, still terrible. Shooting Star Kades, not sure about this one, because anytime we've historically buffed a reviver, it's been OP. Take a look at Maid Chloe. Take a look at Apocalypse Ravi. Blaze Dingo makes a lot of sense as well. Really cool Soul Weaver, excellent design space. Really love to see this character get more love. Kitty Clarissa, not sure about this one either. Character's excellent in Expedition, one of the best Abyss characters in the game, and is probably the best Hall of Trials character also in the entire game. For the actual 3 stars here, for ML 3 stars, I chose ROL as my number 1, Sven is my number 2, and I chose Yoon Ryung as my 3rd choice, but that's a biased pick because I think she's cool but not good enough. I really think it should have been Chaos Sect Axe though. The most commonly chosen answer was None. This is basically code for which character did you want to get a specialty change, and then 20% of people almost chose None, which is, again, a little disheartening. Gloomy Rain was the number 1 choice that wasn't None at 8.9%. Should be fairly obvious why. Banshee girls are really popular. Banshee girls have already gotten specialty changes, so makes sense. Gloomy Rain is the best of the 3 that is not yet with a specialty change, so I can understand why people chose her as number 1. Gunther is number 2. Also is not surprising. Lilius Cleave is a very real thing. And then Gunther is also a character that people use for World Boss, just to kind of get his high CP for extra rewards, but whatever. So Gunther is a character that's constantly on players' minds. How can they Gunther cleave? But with the release of Hua Yang, Gunther has no role anymore because Hua Yang got higher attack with a similar passive than him, and Hua Yang is an excellent unit in a lot of situations in RTA. So you could pick Hua Yang early and then pivot to Lilius Cleave late. So you're not really confined to being like, I have to pick Gunther and Lilius together at the end of the draft. You can literally flex into Lilius Cleave with her. So Gunther basically lost his role, and I can understand that. Captain Rickrus, not a super great specialty change. Harado, obviously a very popular character, was actually PvP viable at one point, so that makes sense. Requiem Roar, again, a Banshee. Sven, absolutely terrible character, only good for baiting light units in Guild War. That's about it. Penelope, Booba waifu, makes sense. Elson, another old character, was nerfed into the ground. Probably could use a buff. Mirsa, I also respect this pick as well. It is the only 3-star that you can play that doesn't have a specialty change that won't get you just like laughed at. It's like actually just not a detriment. So she's the only real 3-star in the game that's not a specialty change hero you can play in PvP. So I chose Chaos Sect Axe as my answer I should have given, right? And that's because once he got reworked, he was actually worse. And considering how popular Axe God was and kind of has been, he doesn't really see any play anymore. And I thought more people would be outraged over how the rework made him worse than what he used to be. So I really thought people would have been like, hey, give him better scaling on his S3, please, so that we can use him kind of like a dark Little Queen Charlotte. And that's kind of what he was kind of billed as. And his just damage is absolutely terrible. So I'm really surprised that more people didn't vote for him. For the 5-star RGB Covenant heroes here, I voted for Araminta first, Redken second, and Destina third. Haste came out ahead as the number 1 pick at 7.9%, and it makes a lot of sense. Very popular character, was pretty good at the start of Epic 7, fell off, and then they pigeonholed him into basically being a golem farmer, and not many people farm golem. There's not a lot of perceived value in farming golem, and honestly, he's not even the best golem farming character. The 2 best golem farming characters are Soul Bad Guy and Vivian, and Soul Bad Guy you can get now for free with the Guilty Gear collab. And then next month in April, you will get a free copy of Vivian. So if you wanted to farm Golem, you could do it with those two characters far easier. So he has no real role or niche. So that's why he's number one. Sez and Destina fall into similar categories. These were the original characters that were considered the best rerolls at the start of Epic 7's lifespan. Sez obviously has not gotten better with age because he is simply a damage dealer with no real utility. And the one thing he has going for him, the Sez bomb was nerfed with the change of Wind Rider. So he doesn't really function anywhere or do anything. And a lot of the old guard players have him invested in. Destina is the same way, perceived as the best Soul Weaver to start the game with. She's just too slow to actually be good. And again, why play a cleanser when Hand Guy exists? Ludwig falls into the same category as Silverblade Araminta. Either is completely nuts because it just cleaves the entire team, or it doesn't do anything, and it's largely too hard to set up. Araminta was my first pick. Character has done nothing. It's literally since the start of the game. Has been in the game since launch. Has never been a good PvE or PvP hero whatsoever. And unlike Silverblade Araminta, when she's allowed to do the thing that she's actually supposed to do, it's just mediocre. Researcher Carrot is the character that Red Araminta wishes that she could be. So yeah, this one's really, really bad. None, again, here at 4.4%. DN, why play DN when Amelia exists and is just a better, long game Soul Weaver than DN? And then also, why play her as a cleanser? Because Hand Guy exists. Ray, same thing. Hand Guy exists. Why play it? Holiday Euphine is actually pretty understandable when you think about it. It's the only summer unit that's not broken, and Euphine is probably the most popular of the three girls between Euphine, Bellona, and what's his name? Asaria. She's the one that's featured in most of the marketing and a lot of the actual artwork that they do, promotional artwork. She's even getting a skin. Euphine is a very, very popular character, which is hilarious when you consider how terrible both versions of her actually are. Then at the end here, we have Zeno at 2.9%. Makes sense. You get him in Hall of Trials. He is a free 5-star, but he's just not a good character to actually play, despite the fact that he's super powerful in lore. So I could see why some people want to actually buff him. The character that I chose that wasn't on the list was Red Ken. And I think that's because I think he needs a rework, because the only place to take Ken is in the same direction as his master, which is Hua Young. You need to make a character that can literally one-shot characters to be viable. That's his only way that you can make him good, because he's just 3 damage attacks with no real utility. So those damage attacks just have to one-shot everything in order for him to actually feel like a character that can do something in the game. So they need to rework him and make him do something different. Because otherwise, the only way to take him is just make him into Hua Young 2.0, and I don't think anybody really wants that. Looking at the RGB 4-stars, my picks were Cirilla, Zerato, and Maya. The most chosen one was None at 18.5%, but ignoring that, Dingo came out in first with 9.3%, which makes sense, again, because Hand Guy exists, why play any other cleansers? Dominiel at 8.6% makes sense as well. Traditionally a character that did absolutely nothing for years, despite the fact that she and her ML counterpart, Challenger Dominiel, are incredibly popular in terms of their design. Dominiel, again, even after the rework, fails to actually see any play. Silk falls into that Sez Destina argument, character that everyone heavily invested in at the start of Epic 7 and has fallen off and never really recovered. Cirilla is quote-unquote a limited unit because you actually can't get her unless you are willing to spend Skystones at this point to get her. So if you're going to invest heavily into getting a 4-star character, they should be worth it. Because right now, outside of Hall of Trials, for those of you who don't have Spectre Tenebria, she doesn't really do anything other than just sway in the character, the character select screen. That's about it. You can just admire her, beautiful assets, because that's about all she's good for. Kali, never good at anything since the start of the game. Zerato was my second pick. Never useful in anything since the start of the game. Roman falls into the same category as Faithless Lidica. Only good when he's actually one of the fastest units in the format. There's no way in hell he's ever going to be the fastest unit in the format, so he does nothing. Surin is the only speed imprint in PvP that actually doesn't do anything. She's competing versus characters like Green Sid and Watcher Shuri. and Green Vildred, all of which are actually really good units. Red Surin is not, so she's the worst of the speed imprints. Makes sense. Rin is a fan favorite character that used to be viable at Champion plus RTA in previous seasons. No way in hell that's happening now with the current level of power creep, so I can see why people want that back. My last choice was Maya, of course. Maya, I think, has a solid kit and has good stats. She just needs better percentages and possibly one or two more tweaks to kind of help her out, either in terms of survivability or a little bit something here or there on her S1 or her S2. Looking at the 3-star covenants, my 3 choices were Basque, Jenna, and Adley. Looking at the most chosen one that is not none at a staggering 27.1% is Godmother. And that one actually makes sense. I looked at her kit. I actually didn't know what she did. She's basically just a bad version of Glenn, but instead of having damage, she has debuffs, and none of the debuffs are actually good. So I don't understand why this one is at number 1. Nemunas at 4% makes sense. Pretty popular character, hasn't done anything. Muse Rima, completely outclassed at the one thing she's supposed to do, which is Brutal Ferris. Tieria, character from the start of the game that used to be really good, is terrible now. Mascot Hazel, replaced by Bomb Model Kana in any game mode you could want to play her in. Basque is my number 1 choice for the same reason as Cirilla. Spending resources is a limited unit. Why is this character so terrible? It doesn't justify the means. Lucy, again, limited unit, terrible. Jenna was my number 2 choice. Absolutely awful unit. Probably the worst 3-star, like amongst the non-2-star units, right? She is the worst, in my opinion, 3-star, 4-star, or 5-star unit in the entire game. She does nothing. Terrible multipliers, terrible debuffs. Certain moves that should do damage don't do damage. Just absolutely miserable, miserable character. And then Butcher Corpse Inquisitor rounds out the list here. The last one that I chose was Adley. Adley actually is a 3-star that is very, very good. If Adley got a specialty change, he could be the Judge Kisei that we actually all wanted as a character. So I am okay with Adley getting a specialty change. So now we come to the 5-star artifacts. My number 1 was Knowledge Seed, number 2 was Flawless Garments, and number 3 was Unfading Memories. None topped the list with 13.1%, followed by Samsara Prayer Beads at 6.3%. And honestly, I probably should have had Samsara Prayer Beads at 6.3%. None of my picks actually made the list, but Samsara Prayer Beads should have been on my list after reading. I didn't actually know what it did. It's completely terrible and unusable by almost everyone, and the buffs on it are way, 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 way too short. Iron Fan was the second artifact. Makes a lot of sense as well. We all thought when Bologna came out that this was going to be a good artifact to pick up for PvE when we eventually would need it. No such PvE content has presented itself where the bosses are blue and you actually want to play a ranger. So yeah, Iron Fan, not really worth it. Definitely needs a change. Upgraded Dragon Knuckles, can see this one as well. Only really good on Counter Milim, and honestly, Tehegel's Ancient Book exists. So why would you ever give up Book for this artifact? Necro and Undine, kind of underpowered. Only really playable on Celestial Mercedes, and that is a character that is, again, one of the ones that people already are looking for buffs on, perceived as fairly weak and not desirable. So why would you want Necro and Undine if it's only playable on that character? Durandal makes sense as well. It is an okay Fine Warrior artifact, but it doesn't feel like broken compared to some of the other options that you could be playing. Like Draco Plate is obviously better for survival and damage. Sigurd Scythe is better for survival and damage. So yeah, Durandal just not perceived to have a lot of value. Noctis got buffed, still trash. Noble Oath, only good on Fighter Maya, so that's why that's perceived as needing a buff. Last Tea Time, actually not that bad of an artifact. It is used on Celestial Mercedes in some compositions, but again, we just talked about Celestial Mercedes, not perceived as a super great character. Ancient Dragon's Legacy, only reason I could think of it being on here is it's Mort, and people are just desperate for something to make Mort good. My 3 choices were not on here at all. I'm baffled that Knowledge Seed is not on here at all. I perceive it as the worst 5-star artifact in the entire game because it doesn't do anything unless you have someone on your team die, and in that case, it is a percentage chance that your team gets a buff, and the buff might not necessarily be useful. So it is a gamble unless you are willing to heavily invest in it, And then on top of it, it could have no impact whatsoever if your team has unbuffable or you just don't need the buff. It's literally an artifact that only does something if you are losing the game. So again, I think it's really terrible. Flawless Garments, literally aside from Shuna, no actual Soul Weaver wants both effectiveness and effect resistance, and Shuna isn't even good. I honestly don't even think it's the best artifact for her, so why does it exist? It's really, really terrible. And then Unfading Memories I picked simply because it's a limited artifact, and unlike every other limited artifact in the game, it's pretty much unplayable. ML 5-star that everybody wanted should not be a shocker. It's the one that I want, the one that you probably watching this video want as well, and it's Mediator Khawaregh, because nobody pulled it for him because he was considered a joke, and then they buffed him to be literally the best character in the game, or I should say the second best character in the game, at least as far as win rate is concerned across all ratings in the game. So yeah, insane character. The rest of the list makes sense except for probably the last one. Aravi, Bellion, Archdemon Shadow, Maid Chloe, Conqueror Lilius, Fallen Cecilia, Designer Lilibet. All heavily played and/or broken characters with the exception of maybe Maid Chloe. And then Straze because he's cool, he's powerful, he's great for aggressive players, and he's good in hunts. So I can see why he rounds out the list. ML 4-star that everybody wants. My answer is number 1. It's Angel of Light Angelica. I have to pre-ban her until I eventually pull her. It's been almost 7 months since she's been released. Still don't have her, and as a result, I just have to keep pre-banning her until I actually get my hands on one. None is the second most common response. Bad Cat Armin at 10.6% because it's the newest one. Most people have this stuff if you're a veteran player. And then the rest of the list is a smattering of characters that are popular, like Blade Karen and Challenger Dominio, to ones like Sinful Angelica and General Purgus for farming hunts. And then you have things like Inferno Kawazu and Great Chief Kawana for their newness factor. Kitty Clarissa for Expeditions, Abyss, Hall of Trials, etc. 5-star Covenant hero that you would like to have the most. My answer is the number 1 answer, which is none, because I own all of the RGBs in the game. But the list pretty much makes sense. Summertime Mysteria at number 1, because it's a character like Seaside Bellona that people for some reason passed on because it was perceived as weak. And then a month or two later, it was like, oh, surprise, it's actually OP now that people understand how the character works. That's why I say always pull for every limited. Even if people think the limited is garbage, things can change. When Milim first came out, she wasn't considered that good for the first week or two, and then she was everywhere. So never ever skip any limited banner for any reason. Even if it's perceived as weak, you never know. With Landy was terrible. Her banner went away, and then they buffed her randomly 2 months after her banner went away, and then she was the best character in the game. And you just couldn't get her for 6 months. So again, never, ever, ever skip any limited units. So Summertime Mysteria at number 1. DN, limited at number 2. Rimuru at 3, limited. Seaside Bellona, limited. Rem, limited. Amelia, limited. Landy, limited. Luna, limited. And then finally Ran, who's super busted and not limited at the last spot. And he's at the last spot because he's super busted. So yeah, that pretty much rounds out the list. And that is pretty much the entirety of the video and my thoughts on it. As always, let me know if I missed anything and what your thoughts are down in the comments below. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I will see you all tomorrow, I believe, because we are apparently getting a new character preview for the Size I Opie Elf Girl. And yeah, so look forward to my thoughts on that one. Until next time, deuces.